Russell Wilson is a good idea on paper, but what's the reality of bringing on another top tier quarterback? Another deeper conversation about a lesser talked option at the same position, and another Buccaneer retires. All of this right now on the Locked On Bucs podcast.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bucs Nation? Welcome to the Locked On Bucs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And we thank you for making us your first listen or view of the day. I am David Harrison, my co-host James Jarko, not with me on today's episode, but you can find both of us covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers for SB Nation's BucsNation.com. When we aren't there or here, you can find us on Twitter at JARKO_Bucs, at DHarrison82, at Locked On Bucs, and at Bucs_Nation. Thanks again for making us your first listen or view of the day. Bringing Russell Wilson to Tampa sounds like a good idea, but it's certainly not a cheap one. So what would it cost? That's a question we received from one member of Bucs Nation.
Hey, James and David, this is Ken Dell out of Orinda, California again. It's a quick question. I am also in the camp of hoping for Russell Wilson, so I'm wondering what the Bucs would have to give up to get him. Either draft picks and how much yearly salary he would garnish, and what it would cost us overall in the long term as well. All right, thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
All right, Kendall, appreciate the voicemail and appreciate the question. This is something that we haven't really dove a lot into. Some of it's just because it is so fluid to a certain amount, but we can go ahead and dive into it here with Russell Wilson. So first and foremost, any team that has Russell Wilson, whether it's the Seattle Seahawks, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or anybody else. I know the Washington Commanders are a team that are also kind of in the mix in that conversation as far as the rumor mill is concerned. Are going to have to deal with Russell Wilson, who's halfway through a 4-year contract right now, worth $140 million, with 70 of that guaranteed. That contract at the time when he signed it back in 2019 made him the highest player at the time in the National Football League. Now it pays him the fifth most in the National Football League. The current deal does include a $5 million roster bonus, which pays out on March 20th, 5 days into the new season, which starts March 16th. I think that's interesting because if you're the Seattle Seahawks and you're trading Russell Wilson, you'd probably rather do it before you have to pay out that $5 million and be on the hook for that versus doing it afterwards and being on the hook for the $5 million. That is kind of why those things are kind of put in there, is if a trade is going to happen, and it doesn't really force the hand because, $5 million at the grand scheme of things for a top-tier quarterback, not the biggest thing to eat if you're going to have to. But it does kind of give the team a little bit of motivation to go ahead and get a deal done. Now, beyond that roster bonus, which the Buccaneers would pay, again, if they traded for him before the fifth day of the new league year, Wilson is also set to count for $37 million against the 2022 salary cap. I know that's going to raise some eyebrows. With just 2 years left, he would probably want a new deal, right? He probably wouldn't want to come into a new team only having those 2 years. He would probably want a little bit more of a commitment to him as a quarterback, to building the team into a champion. And he's got $77 million still due on his current deal. He's likely going to want somewhere around $40 million per year on average, turning 34 this season, which means a new deal you're probably looking at about 5 years, which will take him to 38 years old. So that means you're adding 3 years, right? If those numbers all equate, you're adding 3 years. And if he asks for the $40 million, you're looking at about $123 million in new money. So that will net out to $40 million per year. Again, that money can be spread out. It can be tied to incentives. And maybe you add a sixth void year for good measure. We've seen the Buccaneers obviously do that recently. So you can spread the hit out. So even if he does come in asking for a new contract worth $40 million on average, that doesn't mean you're paying $40 million every single year. And again, that's probably what he's going to want. And that's just me speculating what he might want. Typically, quarterbacks, when you trade the capital that's needed to get him on your team, he feels like you believe he's going to take you somewhere. He wants to be compensated for that. So it's not necessarily what the Buccaneers are going to give him. And listen, money talks, but it talks in different tongues, right? So his current APY is $35 million. Maybe they stick to that APY, right? Maybe he averages per year $35 million, but the Buccaneers, in the years that they add on to his contract, maybe they guarantee more of it. So the current deal he's on, again, that he signed in 2019, only half of his current deal was guaranteed money. So if the Bucs extend him 3 more years to the same APY, so give him 3 more years $35 million on average per year, but they guarantee 60% of that money instead of 50%. Maybe Russ goes ahead and takes that. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't as well. Either way, it would benefit the Buccaneers and Wilson to work on an extension. So you're likely looking at a 4 to 5 year deal being done with Russell Wilson. Again, adding on 2 or 3 more years to the current contract once that trade goes down. So that's money. And honestly, money is fluid, which is why we don't get into a lot of these conversations because, yeah, I mean, his cap number could stay at 35 for the year, and next year it could be 5 or it could be 45. You know what I mean? Like these things are so fluid all the time. It's the per year cap hit as far as that's concerned is really not worth tying too many expectations to because what it can look like year to year can change very, very rapidly. For example, a lot of some people are getting wrapped up, especially on Twitter, about this 35 million or so in cap space that the Buccaneers are expected to have in 2022 and all that, forgetting that the team can free up close to $60 million in additional space this year in just half a dozen simple contract restructures. Like nobody gets any less money. Nobody has to take a pay cut. Nobody gets cut. And the Buccaneers could easily free up $60 million. Now, they're not going to do that unless they have to, right? But we've all heard of it. Mike Evans has done restructures to free up cap space. Ali Marpet has done it. I mean, and these are guys. Mike Evans is actually one of those guys that if he did it again, could free up, I think, about $7 or $8 million, according to Over the Cap, if I remember correctly. And remember, any new deal for Wilson and a new contract for Chris Godwin or a new contract for Carlton Davis or anybody else, it doesn't require a lot of upfront money. Again, the way that the cap allows, the NFL allows these teams to spread money out. It's the reason the Saints are currently $170 million over the salary cap, but they're not having a fire sale getting rid of every big contract they have because they're going to be able to make it work. Trust me. Don't try not to get too wrapped up into cap numbers. I think that's about reflective of what you might be expecting to see or hear from the team if Russell Wilson does join on from a contract number. But again, the year-to-year cap hit and how much actually counts and how much doesn't and all this stuff, it's all very fluid and can change year to year very, very easily. Now, something you can't really tinker with and spread out draft picks, right? A first-round pick is a first-round pick. You can't trade a first-round pick to Seattle and then say, you know what, let's restructure that. We'll give you 7 seventh-round picks for the next 7 years instead of 1 first-round pick. Like you can't, that'd be cool, but you can't really do that. So back in 2021's offseason, right? So the offseason previous to this season, reportedly, right? So I don't know how confirmed it is, but I did see a report that the Chicago Bears actually offered the Seattle Seahawks 3 first-round picks, a 3rd-round pick, and 2 starters. Now, I don't know who those starters are, but 2 starting players from the roster. Again, this back in the 2021 offseason, the Seattle Seahawks did not take that deal, choosing to stick with Russell Wilson. Things have gone a little bit south since then. Some injuries, some missed games, a year older. But I think that's probably a decent mark. I think, 3 first-round picks, 2 third-round picks is probably what you're looking for from a guy to get a guy like Russell Wilson. But again, you look at franchise quarterbacks, and you're not going to get the 5 years of the 4 or 5 years of performance out of a Kenny Pickett or a Malik Willis or a Desmond Ridder that you're going to get out of a Russell Wilson. Now, could you get better play 10 years from now out of a Kenny Pickett or a Malik Willis or a Desmond Ridder than you would out of Russell Wilson at 44 years old or whatever, 43 years old? Yeah, probably. But you don't make these trades necessarily for the long term. You make them for the short term. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it's probably going to cost to get a guy like Russell Wilson. Again, roughly, especially with those cap numbers and contract numbers, those things are so fluid, and the way they can create those things are so finicky that it's hard to really predict from a solidified standpoint. So all of that is just a projection. But something with hard numbers that you can rely on all the time, of course, is betonline.net. They have all your latest odds, totals, player performance props, and where the next coaching hire is going to happen. BetOnline.net is the number 1 spot for all your sports betting needs, and it remains your best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And they're not just looking at basketball, which is in season. BetOnline.net is also your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, all the way down to your Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action going on at betonline.net, where the game starts. Thanks again, Bucs fans, for making us your first listen of the day. Make sure you're following the Locked On NFL podcast on YouTube, as well as an audio format, Locked On Experts, covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. I actually helped co-host the Tuesday episode of the Locked On NFL podcast, or no, the Wednesday episode of the Locked On NFL podcast. And I was a guest on Monday's episode. So make sure you check all of the stuff that's going on over there. Great stuff from a national perspective. For our second segment, it's been an obscure quarterback type of week, because not only did James talk about Mitch Trubisky and Marcus Mariota on this very show for our Wednesday episode, so if you missed that, check that out. But on Tuesday, Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times brought up a quarterback recently that we haven't really talked about all that much. We did touch on him in the very first episode of our quarterback deep dive for our 2022 roster spot projections for quarterbacks. And that, of course, is veteran Blaine Gabbert. And look, Rick Stroud, he even put in the article, he said, listen, he's like, I kid you not, basically. So he knew that a lot of people were going to scoff at it or roll their eyes or raise their eyebrows, but he made a pretty good case. So let's kind of break it down. And again, if you want to read the article for yourself, just head on over to the Tampa Bay Times. You can read the full thing up there and everything that he has to say about Gabbert. But I'm going to kind of hit the finer points here with you on this episode and kind of react to it a little bit. So he doesn't talk about Gabbert being the clear and alone starting competitor. And I think that's first and foremost, that's the most important thing. I don't think if you're going with a quarterback like Blaine Gabbert, so you obviously missed on Aaron Rodgers if he decides to leave Green Bay, Deshaun Watson, and that whole thing has blown up in some way, shape, or form. Russell Wilson's not coming, and those are really kind of your top three targets. You have Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr. I'm a fan of, and I think if Derek Carr comes in, then maybe you still bring in a veteran as a backup, but you don't really bring in the veteran from a competition standpoint. That's probably where you draw the line. Every quarterback after that, Jimmy G, everybody else, I think you're looking at a competition situation. You need to have competition in training camp to see who the starter is going to be, and that includes Blaine Gabbert. And Rick talks about potentially re-signing Gabbert and bringing in Teddy Bridgewater as competition and having Kyle Trask there as your number 3 guy. And then, you're going to have a fourth guy as well somewhere that you bring in. So that's point number one. And I like that thought process, not just about, nobody's getting hyperbolic here and saying Blaine Gabbert's the guy, the heir to the throne and all that other stuff. So good on Rick for bringing in competition. But then he also points out that outside of Gabbert and Bridgewater, he mentions the other free agent options out there, guys, just really aren't all that strong. You've got Marcus Mariota, and Mitch Trubisky that James talked about, Jacoby Brissett, Andy Dalton, Mike Glennon, Tyrod Taylor, and Jameis Winston. And Rick kind of goes through and says, no, nope, no, thank you. Been there, done that, all that stuff. And I agree with him. None of those options. I do think Jameis Winston probably has the highest upside of all those options on that list. But again, he's been in Tampa. Tampa's had him. I think that relationship is gone. So when you look at the options, Blaine Gabbert, simply because of his knowledge of what Bruce Arians likes to do, the physical attributes that we'll get to here in a minute, and the fact that he has been studying with Tom Brady, which again is another point that Rick makes him a very strong candidate for Tampa. Now, maybe not everywhere else, but that actually kind of plays into Tampa's hands a little bit. And Coach Arians actually talked about that himself, quoted as saying, quote, people may not like the overall record, but Blaine had 8 head coaches and 8 coordinators in his first 8 years. Again, this is Bruce Arians, Buccaneers head coach, talking about Blaine Gabbert. Continuing, he beat Jacksonville, their best year. He beat Tennessee, their big year for us in Arizona, and he's been in the system now. I don't have a problem there, and let Kyle continue to grow, either one. Gabbert has never played with a team this good. He's got all the respect in the locker room that he can have, end quote. And that kind of reminds me of another former Buccaneers veteran quarterback. I'm talking Ryan Fitzpatrick, another journeyman who's never really gotten the credit for leading a team. We saw a little bit of Fitz magic. We saw that Fitz magic turn a little Fitz tragic, and we've seen all the trends. But when he got signed by the Washington football team at that time, the Washington Commanders now, obviously now I cover them as well for the network. And I was telling fans, look, I got it. He's never led a team to the playoffs. He's never been a playoff quarterback, all those things. But he's also never been the starting quarterback of a roster that talented. And before you guys throw eggs at me through your computer screens or through your headphones or your stereo, Ryan Fitzpatrick was not the starter for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Right now, you could argue that the Buccaneers squad that he started for was definitely more talented than what Washington had last year. And I would say that's probably pretty accurate, but he wasn't the guy. Jameis was still, quote unquote, the guy. And yeah, there was some back and forth, and maybe Dirk wanted to keep Fitz going. Deshaun Jackson on NFL Network and said he wanted to have Fitz. But again, there was no far and away situation where Ryan Fitzpatrick was the starter like he was supposed to be in Washington last year. I think that, again, if Blaine comes in against a guy like Teddy Bridgewater and wins the competition, he is the starter. This is his best chance. And speaking of that, he's got all the physical tools, 6'5", 235 pounds, big arm, underrated mobility. I think he has all the tools you need to make it work. He's not Tom Brady. You know what I mean? He's not going to make everybody around him automatically better. He's going to need the talent around him to perform with him. But I think he has the tools to drive the car, is basically what I'm saying. And then remember, talking about the Tom Brady connection, he's been in the same meeting room. Like all these people pushing for Kyle Trask to start, a lot of them are like, he studied under Tom Brady for a year. He went through training camp through the season. He saw the meetings. So did Blaine Gabbert. Like Blaine Gabbert has been there as well. And he's been learning. He's been observing. He is fed off of that Tom Brady juju as well. So again, if it's going to be used to support Kyle Trask potentially being the starter, which, hey, if that's where the team goes, it's where the team goes. Then, but I think Blaine Gabbert also deserves that as well. And I think the bottom line to this whole thing, guys, that rookies are not an option. For one, Coach Arians isn't looking to groom a rookie for a 1 year run, and I do believe this is his last season as a head coach in the National Football League. Trask, even though he's a young guy, would be getting his first start if he does start. He has a year in the NFL, and that year in the NFL is big. It's the first time you don't have dietitians kind of just feeding you what you're supposed to. You're an adult. You're making your own decisions, and it's on you. Even without the game experience, his experience just being in the league and being coached by an NFL staff and all these things, I think it's big. So it puts him head and shoulders above the rookies coming out. And Stroud says the Bucs like Trask more than any other options in the draft, more than Kenny Pickett, more than Malik Willis, which if we're talking long-term upside, I'm going to go with Malik Willis there over Kyle Trask. But again, Bruce Arians doesn't have 3 to 5 years from Malik Willis to really grow into his NFL skills. He needs somebody now. And if it's going to be Kyle Trask, at least he has that runway of a year of being in an NFL system, coaching, meeting rooms, all that stuff under Tom Brady beforehand. And bottom line, signing Blaine Gabbert and Teddy Bridgewater to come in and compete would be fiscally simple. You're going to get both of those guys for less than it's going to cost for a lot of these other options. You might be able to get both of them for less than the cost of a Jimmy Garoppolo. I would definitely take that over that. So some good points there from Rick Stroud. Again, the Tampa Bay Times, you want to go read the whole thing. That wasn't everything. Those are just kind of the major points I pulled from it. I wanted to talk about with you guys and expand on a little bit. Fully agree with that. But again, that's after all these others, and if Deshaun Watson in his civil case and if he avoids, criminal trial or criminal charge, which technically as of right now, he's still not out of the water of having criminal trial or criminal charges pressed against him. If he does receive those, obviously that turns a whole other page of things involving him. But if all those options fail and Derek Carr fails and all this other stuff, not a bad way to go as far as I'm concerned. Before we head to segment 3, though, let's hear from another member of Bucs Nation, this time answering our question of the week. If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were to do what the Rams did and leave St. Louis, so the Bucs leave Tampa, would you follow them or would you leave them behind?
David, Kevin from Orlando calling. Hey, so I just listened to your episode this Monday, and yes, I have a lot of thoughts here about my history. I used to be a St. Louis Rams fan. I was for the whole time that they were in St. Louis, honestly, as I used to live in St. Louis. And I am no longer a Rams fan, and I'm a Buccaneers fan, mostly because of the move down here to Orlando. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons why I decided not to be a Rams fan anymore. And number one reason is Stan Kroenke, how he lied to the city of St. Louis, how he told the season ticket holders, I am staying, and everything like that. The city of St. Louis even sued him because of his lies and won a massive lawsuit. I cannot stand the guy. As far as the move goes to LA, I'm not much of a fan of the city of LA. I've been there twice. I did not care for it both times. I really don't have an interest in going there again. There's a lot of reasons why I decided to dump the Rams. Their owner, the city they moved to, I just did not like the direction that the franchise went when they left the city. And it was pretty easy for me to drop them. And especially with me moving here in 2015 to Orlando. And I just decided to pick up the local team here, the Buccaneers, to follow. And I'm following them ever since. Now, if the Buccaneers decide to move, I'm not quite sure what I'd do with myself with that. I think a lot of it would depend on what city they move to and also the circumstances around it, kind of like what happened with the Rams. But yes, me and many of my friends feel the same way regarding the Rams. And some are saying that as long as Stan Kroenke is the owner, they want no part of cheering for the Rams anymore. Some of my friends continue to cheer for the Rams despite that. It does not affect them. But there's a lot of St. Louis Rams fans that have dumped the team because of what happened in St. Louis. And if you research it, you can see just how dirty Stan Kroenke treated the city of St. Louis and how a lot of people are mad at him about it. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a call about my experience as a Rams fan in the past and why I'm a Buccaneers fan today. Go Bucs.
One more segment here at the Locked On Bucs podcast on this Thursday episode coming for you. David Harrison solo on this episode at dharrison82 on Twitter. Find my co-host James Yarko at jarko_Bucs. The show at Locked On Bucs. If you want to get in on answering the question of the week, you got one more day to do it. Really, you got about 12 to 15 hours by the time you're listening to this to get in on the action. You can email us your answer at lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com or call in like Kevin did at 813-444-5841 and drop your answer. Again, 813-444-5841. And Kevin, you don't got to sell me on Stan Kroenke being the worst sports owner in all professional sports. I am a Nuggets fan. I am an Avalanche fan. I'm also a Lightning fan just because I like my Tampa people celebrating good sports achievements and accomplishments. But Stan Kroenke owns both the Nuggets and the Avalanche. So believe me, I am fully aware of the inadequacies of Mr. Stan Kroenke and his sports team ownership. I'm also aware of what he did to the good people of St. Louis. And I'll tell you what, if the daughter of the creator of the Lombardi Trophy wants to get offended by something, get offended that Stan Kroenke got his dirty mitts on your dad's artwork. All right, that's what you need to be offended by. But something we're not going to be offended by, something we're actually going to celebrate is Jack Cichy and his retirement. A guy who had all the potential in the world. His body just would not let him do what he has dreamt of doing. And you've heard me say this before, guys, if you listen to the show for a long period of time, but sometimes players, their bodies just do not agree with their career choices. I'll tell you, my body didn't agree with my career choice. I tore an ankle, I broke a finger, I tore a shoulder, I got arthritis in the neck, head injuries, I got a back injury. All right, but I was able to make it through much longer than Jack, unfortunately, was able to in the National Football League. Looking at Jack Cichy, 5 straight season-ending injuries for this young man, guys. 6th-round draft pick for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2018. Started his career, his first season ended with a torn ACL, but he was on the roster for the 2020 NFL season, so he did earn a Super Bowl ring. So while he's not in a lot of things, Jack Cichy is a Super Bowl champion. Finishes with 3 active seasons to his name, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Again, getting drafted in 2018. Retiring from the NFL at the age of 26. And I will say, at least he got to live out his dream of being in the NFL. He's got a Super Bowl ring. So all the love out there to Jack Cichy. And if you go back to the NFL draft in 2018, when Cichy was drafted, I was incredibly excited. James was excited. Wisconsin Badger linebacker Cichy, probably the most famous play. He had 3 sacks on 3 consecutive plays in a very big game for Wisconsin in his final season there. Battled injuries in college. I mean, if Jack Cichy hadn't battled all those injuries and had that injury problem that he had in college, he probably would have been a 3rd-round pick, guys. But the bottom line is all the injuries just cost him so much and cost so much time and really scared NFL teams that's why he slipped to the 6th round. The Buccaneers took a chance on him. As soon as he stepped into training camp, he was wowing people left and right. Whenever Jack was on the field, you could see that spark. You could see that burst. You could see the playmaking ability and the passion for the game that made Jack worthy of a gamble there in the 6th round. So I tip my hat to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for taking a chance on him in the first place. I tip my cap to Jack himself for giving it a go and giving it a try. And listen, 5 season-ending injuries. I mean, the surgeries you can't even imagine. So congratulations to you, Jack. If you end up getting to hear this, wish him all the best. You know what I mean? It's too bad because I think he would have been something really good in the National Football League had his body given him the opportunity to. But he's a hard worker. He's a grinder. He's going to land on his feet, and he's going to do something good with his time. I'm confident in that, just like you guys do with your time when you call in. And before we wrap up this episode, let's get one more answer to our question of the week.
What's up, guys? It's Zach from Dallas. Just calling, responding to David's question about if the Bucs were to move cities, would I still be a fan? I have to preface, with talking about St. Louis. I have a little insider information because my wife is from St. Louis. Part of the reason the fans in St. Louis are no longer fans is because Kroenke
kind of did double take, begging the city, saying we wanted to stay, we want a new stadium, and the city was starting to work towards that. And then he, kind of middle of the night, left for L.A. So that made a lot of St. Louis Rams fans mad. As for cheering for the Bucs, as long as they go somewhere that is warm weather, nice to go to, I'll be a fan. I'm from East Tennessee originally, so if they go cold weather, I won't root for Dallas, but I'll probably focus more on the Titans at that point. But if they stay warm weather, I'll stay Bucs. All right, guys, take it easy. We'll catch you later.
Kendall, Kevin, and Zach. This is a Stan Kroenke haters podcast, and I love it. I'm here for all the Stan Kroenke trashing we can do. Worst owner in all of pro sports. Thank you, all of you, for calling, and Kendall with a question, Kevin and Zach for answering the question of the day. We've got at least one more answer lined up for tomorrow's episode when James and I are back together for the first time this week. Thanks again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen or your first view of the day. Now make your second listen the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker to bring the NFL draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Again, we're going to be back tomorrow. If you've got questions or topics you want to discuss, if you want to present an idea for the next question of the week, we are going to issue a new question of the week on tomorrow's episode. So if you want to be the person to pose that question, let us know. If not, we'll come up with one on our own, but you can send everything into lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com or call in at 813-444-5841. Again, 813-444-5841 to be a part of the show. For James Yarko, I'm David Harrison. Until we speak again, make sure you're checking out everything we write for BucsNation.com. Find us on Twitter at dharrison82, at @JYarko_Bucs, and at Locked On Bucs. If you're out and about, please be safe. Be kind to one another. Wash your hands, fire the cannons, and thank you for joining us right here at Locked On Bucs.